Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm making a game with some friends of mine called Texas Roguelike. It's an action RPG with procedurally generated levels and enemies, randomized stats, and poker-style betting. This week, I'd like to share how things are progressing with our dungeon generator. But before we jump into that, let's take a look at some other quick updates. Make sure to stick around to the end of the video to see me using some of these tools to create a whole new dungeon from scratch. Alright, first up, solving the age-old problem of the player getting stuck behind level geometry. Matt's solution? This cool transparency shader that activates whenever the character is hidden behind a wall. Matt created this cool spawning in visual effect. We haven't implemented it yet, but I think it would be pretty cool to use when enemies are resurrected by a necromancer or when a certain enemy type calls in reinforcements. What do you think we can use an effect like this for? Let me know in the comments below. Here you can see a different type of placeholder visual effect. This one obscures rooms that the player hasn't entered yet. Eventually, we'll probably replace this with fog or darkened lighting to really sell the idea. We also have working doors with corresponding outline effects. We were using a door model that wasn't very appropriate for this dungeon setting, so Eddie went ahead and started modeling some new doors for us to use in the game. And last but not least, here's a new enemy behavior that prevents enemies from exiting rooms that they're not supposed to exit. This is helpful for many reasons, namely keeping our hallways clear for the time being.
The doc said all his clock's 25 minutes slow. Doc?
Before we jump into our procedural generation updates, why don't you take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. As always, we really appreciate your support. So our procedural generation system is very much a work in progress, but we've definitely got a lot of the fundamentals up and running right now. I'm going to show you where we are as of today, but to do that, I think I should show you a little bit of the journey first. In the early days of Proc Gen, Matt was generating rooms one by one, storing them, and then instructing the generator to stitch them together along this really long hallway. Pre-creating all of the rooms was a bit clunky, so from there, Matt created a system that generated both the rooms themselves and the overall dungeon at runtime. This is definitely better, but if we ever wanted to do handmade rooms down the road, we needed to figure out a way to combine these two techniques together. Another challenge to overcome here was the remarkable linearity of the dungeons at this stage. So we had to figure out a way to create more traditional dungeons with branching hallways, looping paths through the space, and more directional choices for the player. So that's the direction we headed in. Here you can see that we're getting more interesting shapes and paths through the dungeon, but we needed to find a way to push it further. Matt added the ability to generate more than one door per wall and also allowed for corner cutting, both of which helped to make the dungeons more interesting. After conducting these experiments, we all had a better idea as to the ingredients required for the Proc Gen. Here's Matt laying out those ingredients for us.
So a proc room is these blue rooms right here, and they're fully dynamic. They can have this like L shape. They can have doors at any side. A custom room is completely custom, and that's like this circular arena here, and that has a fixed number of doors with fixed positions. And this can be anything we want, but the limitation is right now there's only one of them per level. And then in the middle ground, you have a custom proc room. So these rooms are like this brown and sort of reddish, purplish, and this pinkish reddish one. They can have your own props in there. You can set the insides however you want, but there's still a proc room in that the doors are still dynamic. So here you can see there's a door here and then sort of lower right here. Here there's just one here, a little bit offset up here.
So we have proc rooms, custom proc rooms, and custom rooms all living side by side in wonderful harmony. But we have to make sure that the generator is smart enough not to create a situation that will softlock the player. Here's how Matt handled that.
We need to have a sort of map of how this level works. I'll explain why in a second. So I linked all these rooms together by their doorways and made a map and made a way to traverse the map. So just as a demonstration, this won't be in the game, but if I click on this room, it'll get the shortest path from the start room, which in this case is randomly a custom proc room, but it'll map it out from the middle of the room to the doorway, room, doorway, room, doorway. So if I click over here, here's what that traversal looks like. If I click up here, here's what that traversal looks like. so on and so forth. And the reason this is important is we need to know what's accessible to the player and in what order. So for instance, what if we had a locked door here and then we put the key up here? Well, that would make the level impossible because you can't get to the key without getting through the locked door. So since we know the order of traversal, we know, hey, if we have a locked door here, we need to put a key somewhere on this path before the locked door.
While all of this was going on, I started taking our block out to the next level. Right now we're using a lot of third-party assets just to hit the ground running. The idea here is to create a kind of playable piece of concept art. By creating some ideal, cool-looking dungeon rooms, Matt can derive rules from those experiments and factor them into the generation process. Here you can see that he was able to replicate the basic look of our outdoor area. Gee whiz, it's learning!
Human decisions are removed from strategic defense. Skynet begins to learn at a geometric rate. It becomes self-aware.
We have a similar setup for the indoor areas as well. All we have to do is drag and drop some prop prefabs into a scriptable object, and then plug those into the generator, and bingo, bango, bongo? Well, actually, if I'm being totally honest, it's quite a bit more complicated than that, but you get the idea. Now we can combine prop scriptable objects, dynamic room generation, and custom elements to create all sorts of rooms. And those rooms all get stitched together into dungeons that look quite a bit different than the initial hallway style levels we started out with. Okay, now it was my turn to test the whole system out. In my last video, I mentioned to you that we've been using sprints to keep us organized. In between sprints, we test out all the new work that's been created. This footage was captured after our sprint finished up, when we were all testing the new system to see if we could make use of the tools, but also to see if any problems arose during the process. Here I started simply by generating a dungeon with all the settings Matt had in place when he committed his changes to our repo. We can see the custom room he made and the custom proc rooms as well. Next, I wanted to try my hand at creating a custom proc room. I thought a long, narrow throne room might make for an interesting experiment. So I built it out and then threw it in the old generator to see what came out the other end. Looks pretty good if you ask me. Although I did cover up some areas where doors are generated. At some point we'll have to figure out a way to idiot-proof that one. Then it was time to create a prop object to dynamically populate the dungeons with. I used a bunch of gem assets and created a kind of crystal cavern vibe. Not as dramatic as I hoped, but certainly a good start. Okay, that's it for today, folks. Our upcoming sprint is all about advanced combat, so our next update should all be about heavy attacks, finishing moves, counters, and so on. We'll see you then.
That's all, folks.
Sometimes when you charge them, they run away properly, but sometimes